So I recently saw Dune Part 2, and like many of you, I was very impressed by how well made the movie was. Now, one of the most iconic elements of Dune are the colossal sandworms on Arrakis. There was a moment in Part 2 where a character, referring to a particularly big worm, said the line, "the biggest ever seen." And I've been wondering for a while now, just how big do these worms get? As gigantic as sandworms may be, they actually start life as something much smaller before they become the massive behemoths that roam the deserts of Arrakis. Sandworms actually begin their journey as sand plankton, and after a time spent burrowing in the sand, they become the unassuming creatures known as sand trout. Curiously, these sand trout are described as half plant, half animal. These juvenile forms dwell beneath the surface in vast numbers, converging on water deep underneath the surface. Then, when their bile mixes with the water, it becomes a pre-spiced mass, and they apparently also release a gas, which, when you mix all these elements together, you get an explosion called a spice blow, which can be lethal to the little sand trout. But those that survive grow into young sandworms. To get bigger, you usually have to eat something, but what could these creatures be eating to attain such a large size? Well, apparently, a large amount of their diet consists of sand, as well as other inorganic matter on the crust. In fact, there are even some fan theories that they consume metals that they need for their metallic skeleton, theoretical metallic skeleton. Again, that's just according to the theory. But it is also believed that they feed on the sand plankton, almost like whales that filter feed on plankton on Earth. Speaking of whales, let's get into some size comparisons. Many like to compare the worms to the largest animal on Earth, the blue whale. I'd like to do a more detailed video on how big a blue whale can grow, but for now, let's just take a rough size of about 100 feet and a weight of more than 100 tons. Now that sounds pretty huge, but that's nothing in comparison to the worms. According to Dr. Yui, worms over 450 meters have been spotted. That's over 1,476 feet. And there's also the diameter, which is supposed to be somewhere around 40 meters, or 130 feet. But there are bigger claims. Apparently, the really big ones live around the southern pole, and they could be more than twice that size, with size claims of 700 to 1,000 meters in length, so a kilometer long, or 3,280 feet. It gets to a point where it becomes difficult to imagine something that large existing, but that's what the movies are for. Of course, size is more about how much something weighs, but it's difficult to determine how much a creature of this length would weigh, but it would have to be a lot. Some estimates put it in the millions of tons. Taking the smaller 450 meter long sandworm and using the square cube law and comparing it to a blue whale, and assuming both are a cylindrical shape, some fans, such as the Reddit user Thomas C. Galvin, have estimated 14,300,000 tons. And of course, the kilometer ones would be much heavier. But even that big may not be the biggest. Mild spoilers, but Paul encounters a very large one in the new movie. And according to the book, this Shai Hulud was half a league long. Now, how long is half a league? Well, it's about 1.5 miles long, or 2.4 kilometers. That's longer than 7 large aircraft carriers put together. Using the square cube law again, we would get a weight somewhere in the billions of tons, although the atmosphere and gravity are different on Arrakis. And we don't really know too much about the biology of the worm. But even with all that, it's safe to say it's extremely and insanely large. And how long does it take for a creature to get this big? Well, I'm not sure, but they are able to live for thousands of years. So I imagine the big ones are pretty old. Sandworms are an important part of the planet, as they are the primary producers of spice. which is called the most valuable substance in the universe, and they also hold a significant cultural and religious importance to the Fremen, but also they're pretty big.